Thank you, thank you. All right, come on in. Excellent. I feel like we're sitting quite a way apart. That's all right. There we go. Dino, I mean, just to kick us off, we've titled there the conversation around the road to real zero. It's something that your executive chairman has talked a lot more about, needing to shift sort of the goalposts to net zero in 2050, more to achieving real zero by 2040. Can you just talk to us about what's the material difference there? And when you put your Fortescue hat on and think about the industry challenges that changing the goalposts represents, what is the set of challenges that are top of mind for you?
Yeah, sure, and thank you very much. It's great to be back here at IMARC, another huge event. I hear it's grown about 30% this year, so it's fantastic. Actually, internally in our organisation, we changed the language from net zero to real zero a couple of years ago, actually, where our aspiration is to completely rid ourselves of hydrocarbons for our industrial operations by 2030. And that's led to our chairman really pushing the advocacy that it can be done to the rest of the industry and really the globe for a call now for action to 2040. But as you said, there are some challenges associated with that, and they are certainly in our wheelhouse as well. First off, I'd say the technology. And why we're sitting here a year after we were talking about some of the planning of this last year, we're really into action now. The technology has moved, and it's moving at a faster rate of knots. The cost profiles are coming down, and we're more forthright than ever to be economic as well in our aspiration for real zero. That's why the call to action out there for the industry we've made quite loud and proud actually just recently.
Absolutely. You faced some criticism earlier this year in the media coverage in Australia regarding what was described as a scaling back on green hydrogen. Can you explain the decision and help us make sense of how it fits into the longer term vision for Fortescue from a renewable standpoint? Does it indicate a shift in strategy?
Absolutely not from a change in strategy. I acknowledge the Australian media picked up the scaling back of hydrogen. Let me just rewind what our strategy was. Similar to when you're finding and exploring for a new commodity or a new mine, you go and peg out your resource base, and that's exactly what we did. Now, 4 years ago, we started the journey where we're on the search for renewable energies in the forms of hydro, sun and wind all around the world. And we essentially pegged a lot of the places around the globe. It was always the intent that you had to have the green electrons first. If you have that and you have an excess supply of green electrons, either from existing sources or the potential of sun and wind, then the opportunities for hydrogen, green ammonia, green fertilizers, more green electrons, or using the hydrogen actually as a chemical reductant become very, very interesting. And that's certainly where we are now. So our locations in Latin America, in Northern Africa, for instance, the Middle East, and in Australia are still very much on our radar.
So a theme that's run through this morning has been some of the comparative commentary around Australia's competitiveness when held up against some of our international rivals, I guess, so to speak, with regards to the energy transition and the centrality or otherwise that Australia might have in that mix depending on our ability to compete. I'm interested in your perspective. You see there being some significant disparities, particularly between China and the West. Can you just speak to what you think is an opportunity or a message you've got for Australian industry and government alike around what we need to do to enhance our competitiveness?
Yeah, I've been quite forthright in this positioning over the last 6 months. In fact, I have the honour to join an Australian delegation heading off to China this evening to advocate for the same positioning. Let's not miss this boat. The reality is China has been on the transformation agenda for the last 10 years. And now they're at points of cost parity where renewable energies, even in China, and I'll get to the kind of mind-boggling fact about that in a minute, is now less expensive than its coal equivalent. Which, when you think about it, a country like China, which does not have the inherent potential that Australia does, we're missing a shot here. And my call for action really is that industry and government, strategic partnerships has been well spoken about. Tanya just spoke about that at length. That is going to be the key. But it does need industrial and political leadership to get going. Because as you've seen with most industrial revolutions, it starts with the cost of energy. You saw that with coal, you saw it in South Africa with hydro, you saw it on the East Coast here with the aluminium industry, my home state in alumina in the Southwest with coal. It all comes down to the cost of electricity. And that's one where I view that it's bipartisan around which political affliction you side with. We must solve that problem. The beauty is that we have on our doorstep manufacturing opportunities which allow Australia to compete internationally. And when you have that cost of electricity so low, combined with the abundant resources we have, the geography position that we have, I mean, I just think it's a recipe that we cannot let slip by. And that's the message, is it will slip by. China, the US, the rest of the world is not going to wait for Australia to sit here and work this stuff out. Is it difficult? Absolutely it's difficult. But we've got to do it.
So I gave you a magic wand and said you could do anything within your power to help us regain leadership. What would you change?
I would build the world's biggest solar and wind farm in our sparse outback that we have. We work with traditional custodians, we work with government, we just build. We build the biggest solar farm and wind farm that we have on the planet. Get our cost of electricity to next to nothing. And that will spawn an entire new industry where we can finally take our commodities, turn them into downstream green products that the world now wants. It's insatiably in demand for this.
Not unrelated challenge is Australia's productivity. It's been on the decline since 2005, had a little bit of an improvement in the last 12 months, but still sitting 13th globally and slipped as low as 19th going back 12 months ago. Are there specific innovations, things that you think we need to do that could substantially increase productivity? What's your position on that topic?
Well, I think Australia is uniquely positioned. We've championed, particularly in mining, a lot of the technological advancements that you see being deployed around the world. So I left Australia about 20 years ago. We were fourth in the productivity metrics. And I thought we had a way to go. So to come back to hear that we were 19th, I was a little bit bummed by that, to be honest. So I think, particularly when we've got such a small population base with a huge land mass, we need to harness technological advancements. And that does not mean that we need to change jobs or anything like that. We can harness automation, robotics, like we've actually pioneered in Australia, and put that to work. Build that huge solar and wind farm that I'm talking about with the lowest capacity of labour. But I'm not talking about less jobs. I'm actually talking about more prosperity because we need to conquer on scale. And we have that opportunity. And we have the minds, we have the creativity. You've got people all over the world who are Australians doing this in other countries. Give those people an opportunity to do it in Australia and they'll flock back. I'm one of them.
Yep. And so just to stay there for a moment, you mentioned industry have played a very significant role in this. The technological advancement of the mining and resources industry has been quite supreme. Is this about greater strategic partnership with government, to use language we heard moments ago? Is that what it looks like, picking a major project and using that as an opportunity to really go to work in a concerted manner on the productivity challenge?
Look, it's not only government. I think what I guess I didn't realise is how much industry does collaborate when you're in Africa or in Asia or in the States. And here, when I come back home, we're a little bit stuck in the threat of anti-competition, or we can't work with our rivals, or it's ego, or something like that.
What do you think that is here versus other countries?
Well, I think it's because of the conservatism that we've had. We've had it good for a long period of time. We haven't really needed to change the way we do business. But out of necessity drives creativity. And I saw that around the world, and I think we can adopt that here, which means working laterally across, heaven forbid, the competitors that I'm not normally allowed to talk to, or the OEMs. Let's get us all around the table and say, you know, what is the actual problem we're trying to solve for? And if we can unite on the cost of electricity, which I think is a pretty uniting factor, why not solve it? We've got some of the best minds, we've got capital, we've got an access to a market, we've got manufacturing on our doorstep. Let's go for it. What's holding us back?
Is that leadership collaboration starting to happen, or is there still a shift in mindset needed from across the industry?
I think it's starting, right? It's great to hear words like strategic partnership. Last year we weren't talking about that. We were talking about each other's plans and maybe competition. But I do think it needs to take another big step forward. Actually commit together before the lawyers get involved.
You mentioned you've spent a lot of time working overseas as well as had obviously a long career in the Australian industry. You're a big believer that certainly when it looks to the iron ore industry, it's critical that the lessons of what the nickel industry went through are learnt and are not repeated. Can you just speak a little bit to your perspective and the plans actively that Fortescue are putting in place to make sure you approach iron ore differently to what happened in nickel?
Sure, and I don't want to be misquoted again, but I think there are very different market factors with nickel and iron ore. One is a much bigger volume-based commodities, one's the other niche commodity. But having been the person in Sulawesi holding the reserves to then see them being relinquished to the Chinese, who came out of nowhere and built the biggest nickel industry the world has ever seen and disrupted and took out an entire market sector in 4 years.
Wow.
Right? To see that happen and then coming back home thinking, wow, this almost seems like deja vu. And the reluctance that we have as industry and governments to think that this is just an ambit threat, you just have to watch what's happening. The investment in Saudi Arabia for green iron and green metals and a green steel industry. Last night, a plant was announced in the Middle East to make, I think, 2 million tonnes of green steel. Oh. Right? Not using Australian iron ores, by the way. Simandu's coming online. That's a high-grade deposit going straight into the steel mills in China. We have an existentialism, is my view. And we cannot miss the boat again, right? So what are those parallels between downstream processing and energy? That is where, if we can make that marriage happen, finally the economics and the scale becomes so enormous that we push ourselves back into that market. And we have a chance. But again, my warning is, look at what's just happened in nickel. We were given that opportunity as well, by the way. And we probably thought, it's never going to happen. You'll never get somebody that will have a technology disruption like happened in RKF and nickel and HPAL and nickel now. They've conquered it. They're doing it, right? Let's not sit here with our head in the sand thinking it's not going to happen again. And yes, I may be a bit assertive with my messaging, but I think, look, I'm an optimist. We have a huge opportunity. That's why we came home, I joined a great organisation, our founder sees the world the same way. Let's go for it.
So with that context, how are you as a leader approaching the opportunity and the challenge ahead of you differently based on that? Are there conversations, are there strategic processes, scenario planning that you're doing that are fundamentally different to what you might have done had you not seen that firsthand? Yeah,
absolutely. So at Fortescue, we're taking a project now. In 12 months, we're going to have, I think, Australia's first green metals plant. What's green metals? Green iron ore. It's essentially taking iron ore, reducing it with hydrogen, making it 95% metal. It'd be 2,000 tonne per annum. It's not huge, but it's not lab scale. We're covering the entire cost of that to demonstrate that technology is possible, because that's been out there for a long time, that you can't do it with Pilbara-based iron ores. Well, even if you can't do it now, you're going to have to do it, because the steel industry accounts for a significant proportion of carbon emissions on the planet. And currently the route is through coal. So you have to be able to do it through hydrogen. There are no other chemical ways to do it. So you have to be able to reduce it without coal. We're going to show that, prove to the world that it can be possible. And in parallel to that, we're advocating for a much, much bigger plant. And again, that is to lean on partnerships with other organisations, energy providers, because that's a significant part of the equation here, and certainly governments and First Nations groups in the areas that we operate. Again, to demonstrate that Pilbara-based iron ores can be competitive into the future.
You mentioned partnerships there. It's something that's been a very active part of your strategy. You've recently entered into a number of new partnerships. Can you talk about their role in your journey towards both getting innovative and sustainable technologies into your business, but equally the role that they're playing on your journey towards decarbonisation and operational efficiency?
So maybe I'll get a bit geeky here and talk about an abatement curve, and hopefully some people out in the audience will know that.
There's a few smiles, so I think you're speaking their language.
A lot of people out here are flogging technology to help solve some of the challenges with abatement curves. So what you see with abatement curves, basically it's the ability for us to get off hydrocarbons. And it levels up all of the different type of technological challenges, whether it's trucking, rail, all of those issues. It's essentially largely flat with a big hockey stick at the end. So the last 20%, 30% is really, really difficult to abate. Now, how does a alumina refinery that's been operating its entire life on a coal-fired power station just suddenly switch off, right? They are different challenges, right? And we can sit here and say it's impossible, or we can flip it to say it's actually possible to do it. So our journey has been, you can't look to your traditional suppliers, your traditional thinking to solve some of these problems. Quite cliche, right? So an example is we put a call out to say, well, we have to solve this challenge of trucking because mining is essentially just big trucks and we need them to get off diesel and hydrocarbons. We didn't have a solution for that. So we asked the trucking manufacturers and they didn't have a solution either. So we thought, what are we going to do? So we started to look elsewhere, where in the EV sector, for instance, in small vehicles, we started to look in the race car industry. Well, they've been solving it for a long time, and race cars and big trucks are actually quite similar, to be honest. It's all about power to weight. So we started to look very, very out of the box, so to speak, around who do we partner with. And unfortunately, nobody came forward. And I knew what was going to happen. Our chairman was going to say, well, if there's no one out there, go and do it yourself, right? And when you think about all of those little technological hurdles on the abatement curve, I'm so glad we have partners along the journey, because I don't really want to be building and doing all of those other things. We don't have the time, the skills, or the horsepower to do all of that. So this is where partners are really, really critical. Okay, we have an ambition. We need people to come forward. I mean, right outside here, you've got the Ford 150 Lightning. We had the very first one of them in the Pilbara a couple of years ago. Yeah, mate, we got it into the country. It's not allowed to go on the road, but we got it on the mine site. And all of a sudden, you've got a company right out here, AussieV, I think they're called, that's selling the 150 Lightning, which is an all-electric industrial mining truck. Myveco's out there as well doing it. So it's amazing how these flywheels start turning and then all this other industry comes about. And we've got the horsepower here in Australia to do it.
Dino, thank you so much for joining us for that insight into Fortescue's approach to real zero as opposed to net zero, that call to action for the industry to lean in and to not miss this moment, an invitation to start thinking differently, stop competing, start more actively and strategically collaborating, and to make sure that we re-elevate or increase our productivity once again so we can seize the opportunity that is presented. An optimist, which I'm grateful for. Can you join me in thanking Dino Otranto for joining us this morning? Thank you, Dino.